In late 2023, I received an invitation by a fellow YouTuber by the name of Becca, and she wanted to do a collaboration between her, myself, and 10 other YouTubers. Now, this collaboration consisted of each of these YouTubers creating a quilt row, and toward the end of the year, when it all comes together, we'll sew all the rows together and we'll get a very eclectic looking quilt. Hi, my name is Eric of Treasure Heart Creations, and if this is the first time you're viewing this channel, well, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, well, welcome back. I do a series of videos of tutorials making quilt blocks. I do live sessions in which we're just chatting and sewing and sometimes crafting. And I also dabble in a little other crafts like paper crafting and wreath making, the whole 9 yards. Once in a while, though, I like to produce a video that tells the story behind the making of the quilt, talking about the inspiration, talking about the struggles that I had putting the quilt together and the lessons that I've learned. And I call this video series With Every Stitch. So when Becca extended out an invitation to join this collaboration, well, I decided that I wanted to actually create a video or create a row and tell the story about the creation of that quilt row. This is the row I created. The block is called the paper crane, but there's a story behind it, and that's what we'll discuss in this video. So I hope you enjoy this. And I know this is cheesy, and I know you get tired of hearing this, but if you like the content, please give it a like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications so you'll know when I upload my next video. Thank you. You get a very eerie feeling walking on these grounds. It might be more psychological in that I know what happened here over 80 years ago, but it's like there's this veil of sadness here. In high school, I did a research project about Asian history in the US, more specifically focusing in on Hawaii. And actually, I was just doing some research about my own family ancestry. And I somehow got fixated on what happened with Japanese Americans during the time of World War II. It's a bit shocking how many people don't know about the incarceration of Japanese Americans, and yet I believe it had such an impact on shaping government policies towards, well, any minority group. But when I think about it now, as time passes on, we tend to forget about the lessons from the past. And so I feel that it's good to sort of learn about history and revisit those lessons.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack on the U.S. Navy fleet stationed out in Pearl Harbor. In response, the U.S. declares war against Japan. Now, rumor had it, though, that prior to the attacks at Pearl Harbor, Japanese living in Hawaii were acting as spies for the Japanese government. Now, at the time, there were a lot of Japanese living on the U.S. West Coast, and even though many of them were legally U.S. citizens, their loyalty to the Japanese government kind of became a huge question. Hate towards Japanese or Asians in general didn't start with Pearl Harbor. There's a long history of hate towards Asian immigrants, especially towards the Chinese. And this is going back to the first Asian immigrants. In the 1800s, many Asian immigrants came to the United States, and they were just viewed as cheap laborers. They were paid half or even less as their white or Caucasian counterparts. Yet they did twice the amount of work. And, from a business standpoint, if I'm a business owner, of course I want to hire the Asian laborers because they could produce twice as more, and yet I would keep my costs down. But from the white or the Caucasian perspective, these Asian laborers were just stealing their jobs. And so it created a type of animosity among these ethnic groups. When you think about it, even till this day, there's still some animosity towards ethnic groups because they get paid less, but yet they work twice as hard and produce twice as more. And I find it interesting that after all these years, we're still having this argument. So the attacks on Pearl Harbor didn't necessarily start this hatred towards Japanese. It basically only threw fire or threw gas on a fire that was already burning. And people seized the opportunity to express their hatred towards the Japanese. This is a classic case of racial profiling. We'll call it wartime hysteria, stereotyping. The common belief at the time was that if Japan was bad for attacking the US, therefore all Japanese must be bad people. And even the ones that were born as here in the US and were legally US citizens, they kind of fell into that category of they're just bad people.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous, but no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores.
Under the recommendation of military officials, some of whom were very suspicious of being prejudiced towards Japanese, even before Pearl Harbor, the US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he issued Executive Order 9066. And this one document drastically affected over 100,000 people because it required that all Japanese or people of Japanese ancestry, regardless if they were US citizens or not, they were to report to what was called a war relocation center. Basically, they were just being incarcerated for being Japanese. And so with Executive Order 9066 in place, many Japanese, they had to liquidate all of their assets. If they owned or operated a business, they either had to give away their inventory or just sell it for dirt cheap. Homes and automobiles were kind of confiscated or auctioned off. The only thing they could really save was whatever they could carry and fit into a suitcase. So they were packed up and shipped off, and nobody knew where they were headed or what fate lied ahead for them. There were 10 war relocation centers or camps that incarcerated over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry. While most of the camps were located in desolate and isolated desert lands in the American Southwest, there were a few oddballs. One of them that I can think of was in Jerome, Arkansas. But perhaps the most well-known was Manzanar, located in California. And during my relocation from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, I decided to make a detour and visit the site, or what's left of it.
Out there is Death Valley. Behind me are the Sierras. You know, you really get a sense that you're stuck out in the middle of nowhere, because for miles and miles, I mean, there is a highway 395 right there, but they just stuck these internees just in the middle of the desert.
Today, the Manzanar site is part of the U.S. National Park System. Most of what is there has been restored or recreated to look like the original. There are exhibits where you can learn about the Manzanar experience, and you're encouraged to wander around the grounds. So that's exactly what I did. It was called a relocation center, but when you look at it for what it really was, these were jails for Japanese. No, they weren't put in handcuffs. In fact, most of the prisoners didn't really resist arrest. In Japanese culture, if you want to show loyalty or respect to any authority or authoritative figure, you kind of just do as you're told and you don't question it. And so since these Japanese were, they were incarcerated for being on suspicions of being spies, they didn't put up a fight because they wanted to show that they were loyal to the US and not Japan. And they were just doing as they were told. In reading and listening to firsthand accounts, there was a phrase that kept coming up, and I heard it from a lot of different individuals. It's pronounced shikata ga nai. The literal translation means it can't be helped. But in the context of this particular situation, whenever anyone said shikata ga nai, it was the equivalent of saying, well, okay, this is the hand that we were dealt. Let's make the best of this bad situation. And that's exactly what they did. One thing I didn't realize until I actually visited the Manzanar site was how people coped with this situation. They tried to create a life within these relocation camps. There was a school system with grades K all the way through high school.
Okay, so we're gonna head into one of the barracks that is set up like what the school would have looked like here, or the school setup. So, oh, how cute. And yeah, wow. And again, all of the furniture, according to one of the panels, all of the furniture was just made with scrap wood. Typical classroom setup. Wow, look at that. An actual diploma. Manzanar High School. Wow, look at that. There were social events like dances, clubs, sports leagues. In fact, one of the more popular events within Manzanar grounds were these baseball games. I've read some accounts where somewhere around 2,000 people actually would attend a baseball game. And even walking around the grounds, you can kind of see remnants of these Japanese gardens that they made, sort of small parks where people kind of walk through and enjoy it. So, all throughout the grounds here, you kind of see remnants of what some of the old barracks were, or where they were, and you see markers.
alongside the road where you can drive. Like here, we kind of see there's this long road. This probably cut through the entire property from one end to the other. And here, I'm imagining that this would have been some kind of like Japanese garden, because you can see huge boulders right there. And well, let's see if we can go out there. You know, just signs that they were making the best out of a bad situation. And you can kind of tell that there might have been a fish pond here, or there actually was a fish pond here. So this, again, this is desert. How in the world do you actually make a park with a fish pond out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, in the Sierra Desert? Desert. Can I say that right? Well, personally, I don't know what I would have done, quite honestly, if one day somebody told me that I needed to just uproot my life and move somewhere and not know where I'm going, why I need to go. I don't know. I don't know how I would react to that.
It was very interesting to walk into the mess hall, because this is where all the meals were served. And where there's food, people will gather. Or this is the mess hall, the area in which they ate. Oh, it's not really big. Oh, ever secret storage right under the mess hall. Yep, this is where they hide all the contraband, I assume. In regards to mess halls, an extra space and relief from the summer heat. Daring internees even set up stills to ferment forbidden alcohol. Yep, and playing cards. Ooh. You rebels, you. Still, these camps were not glamorous. Think of a wooden military barrack where everything is out in the open and there's no such thing as privacy. Take the women's bathroom as an example, because the first thing I noticed was the absence of stalls or doors around the toilet. Okay, look at this. This is the bathroom. Notice that it's just open. Everything is open. There's no stalls. There's no hiding of anything. I mean, that's no privacy whatsoever, not even in the bathrooms. How do you like that? Then of course, the sink's there. Let me walk around, because this is the shower. All open showers. Wow. Again, talk about no privacy for anything. You know, for guys, it wouldn't be a problem because we can always just kind of lean up against the wall, take care of business, and that's that. But for women, you know, without a door or without stalls, everything's kind of out in the open for everybody to see. Even the living quarters, again, remember, this is like a military style barrack. So you don't have your own private space. I mean, it's one massive hall and you do have an assigned bed, but you're packed in there with who knows how many other families and people. There weren't any walls to define a private space. So it was pretty much all open. I have read accounts where women came forward admitting that they were raped. I've also read accounts where children, and this is kind of disturbing, that children were being molested. And there's a very well-known incident specifically at Manzanar where a riot broke out, and the military guards had to kind of open fire to control the crowd. And let's not forget that these camps were out in the middle of nowhere in these desert lands. So the summers were very hot and the winters were extremely cold. In fact, Manzanar itself Manzanar itself is in close proximity to one of the harshest living environments in North America. It's literally the next valley over, and with death in its name, that should be telling you something. One of the most iconic views within the Manzanar grounds was a spot known as the cemetery. A handful of prisoners had their final resting spot within Manzanar. It's a bit ironic because it's the most beautiful location within the grounds. But the idea of dying while being incarcerated and your only crime is being of the wrong ethnicity, I feel it's a sad way to leave the world.
So this area here is what they call the Manzanar Cemetery. You got the Sierras that way. You got Death Valley pretty much that way. And so right here, well, nothing out here as far as the eye can see. There are a few people that have lost or passed away while being interned here at Manzanar. So they created an area where they buried their bodies. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, there's a handful of plots here. I think these are plots. Anyway, well, let me just kind of look at this. This is kind of beautiful. I mean, it's kind of a morbid area, but kind of beautiful at the same time. If you think about it, I mean, this is where they came to bury the people who passed away, and they probably buried them in the nicest spot on this whole camp or on this whole property, with the Sierras in the background. Nice way to honor the people who have passed.
It's a bit of a contradiction between this beautiful, beautiful landscape and the veil of sadness that sort of sits over that location. As the war came to a close and as time passed on, the US military and the US government finally realized that these Japanese prisoners, they didn't really pose any threat to the US. And so they started the process of releasing everyone. But even then, I kind of feel like it was still a slap in the face. I mean, think about this. In modern times, when a criminal is incarcerated for a long time, and when they're finally released from prison, today there's social services to help them reacclimate and kind of get their life back together. But back then, for these Japanese prisoners, it was like, oh, here's $50. Bye. Well, at least they were offered transportation to wherever they wanted to go. Even then, where would they go? I mean, remember that a lot of them, they didn't have a home to go back to. Some of these prisoners, when they were released, they took the opportunity to relocate, and they literally had to rebuild their lives. For a very long time, a lot of these prisoners that were incarcerated, they kept silent about the whole experience because they were embarrassed, they were ashamed, or maybe they just wanted to kind of forget about that particular time period and move on with their lives. As time went by, some of them broke that silence because They realized that something like this has the potential of happening again, maybe to a different ethnic group or a different segment of the US population. And in reading and watching some of the interviews of those that lived this experience, they all had a message of hope that future generations don't have to go through the same experience. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. This was an apology by the federal government towards those that were incarcerated in these relocation centers. The good part was that there was an apology. And as a form of restitution, $20,000 was set aside and paid out to each victim. The bad part, though, was that this apology came a bit late because many of those that were incarcerated had already passed on. But at least their surviving family members could file a claim and keep the money. I have to believe that this Civil Liberties Act of 1988 serves as a reminder for the US military and the federal government not to racially profile or stereotype in the name of national security. Otherwise, it could cost the government a couple $1 trillion. I mean, let's do the math. 20,000 times 100,000 people, that's over $2 trillion set aside as I'm sorry money. And let's think about this too. After the 9/11 attacks, was the government in a rush to round up any Middle Eastern or anybody that looked like they were from that part of the world? Were they quick to round up anybody that was a practicing Muslim? Of course, there were personal sentiments from the ignorant Joe Schmo, but you didn't see the federal government cry out, "Oh my God, we have to gather all the Muslims and put them in a camp." And I truly believe that this is a direct result of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, as well as a result of the survivors of the incarceration camps kind of sharing their stories and spreading that message of hope. While at the Manzanar Cemetery, I saw these origami paper cranes. They were draped over the monument that's at the cemetery. And there is a Japanese, well, it's kind of like an old wives' tale, but it's a belief that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you can make a wish, and that wish should come true. This is a centuries-old tale, but it was made famous by a young girl named Sadako. Sadako was a victim of the atomic bomb that dropped on Hiroshima. She survived the initial bombing, but like many others, she developed leukemia from the radiation and eventually passed away at the age of 12. While she was in the hospital getting treatment, she began folding these paper cranes. Now, there's some controversy of whether or not she actually folded all 1,000, which was her goal. But regardless of that, her story became a message of peace, and the paper crane became a symbol of hope. As quilters, we all have different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different upbringings, but we can connect because we have a common love for this particular activity. I mean, put a bunch of quilters in a room and watch what happens. Today, we can even connect internationally with technology, with YouTube and other social media platforms. By all means, we are not perfect, and each of us we all got our own issues to deal with. Yet, even with all of those differences, we can gather around a sewing machine and have a jolly sewing good time. And that's the thread that holds us all together. I think that this traveling quilt is a prime example of that. I mean, here we have 12 different creators that are unique and diverse in our own way, but yet we all came together to create a very eclectic quilt. Each of us created and shared something different, but in the end, I believe this will be something very beautiful because of what it represents. So for my row, I chose to do the paper crane pattern because it is the symbol of hope. You know, with everything going on in the world in the aftermath of COVID-19, the US presidential elections, conflicts around the world, I mean, we have everything, or we have so many things that are kind of dividing us as people and communities. But all of us quilters have a unique opportunity to kind of demonstrate how to overcome those differences through our shared joy of quilting. And I'm hoping that those that have followed the creation of this traveling quilt during this past year, the content creators that partook in this project, as well as the recipient of this quilt, I hope we all share the same sentiment that through quilting, there can be hope. I know that sounds cliche, and I know it's the joke of every beauty queen. Oh, what do you wish for? Ah, world peace. But, you know, let's all give it some serious thought, because if hope dies, what do we have left? I am truly glad that I had this opportunity to partake in this traveling quilt. I'm also glad that I went on this journey and discovered the history of this particular time period, because the lessons that I learned far outweigh the effort that I had to put in. And every time I think about this quilt, or I see a picture of it, I'm going to remember all of this.